Tonight on the Wrap, 7 dead, more than 200 injured after an Amtrak train reportedly goes over 100 miles an hour and derails near Philadelphia last night. Republicans took control of the Senate back in 2014. Can they keep control in 2016? President Obama speaks out about the media's representation of America's poor, and one news network really gets him angry. You'll never guess which one. And even before you say, are we talking Hillary tonight? Yes, and there's even more trouble for the Democratic likely nominee. And we've got potluck. We've got yay and nay. This is the Daily Wrap, live from New York City. And welcome to the show. I'm Joe Concha, joined by my Sirius XM host and my Forbes.com columnist.
And my.
You're bookmarked everywhere on my computer.
In the butt, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
apparently somebody's reading prompter. That is Rick Unger. And to his right, she's the host of Close Encounter and You're Not. Lisa Janovitz is back with glasses this time, always changing her brand. And to her right, she's the editor of JaneUnchained.com. Jane Velez Mitchell, back again as well. All right, busy night. Let's get right to the Daily Download. And a new report finds Republicans may have a hard time holding on to their new majority in the Senate for very long. Political analyst Charlie Cook says the 2016 race, Republicans don't have the same advantage as they did in last year's Senate election. In 2014, Republicans won Senate seats in 7 states where, coincidentally enough, Mitt Romney won easily in 2012. President Obama's approval ratings were also plummeting, and Republicans had just a handful of seats they needed to defend. 2016 is a much different story. Take a look at the numbers. This time around, Republicans have 24 seats to defend, and in 7 of those states, President Obama won in 2012. Democrats have just 10 seats to defend, and President Obama won in all of those 10 states. Here are the 7 states with Republicans, with Republican senators, I should say, who won President Obama in 2012. Florida, Illinois, Iowa, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And while there's a source of concern for Republicans, Cook points out that Democrats are unlikely to beat Chuck Grassley in the red state like Iowa. And another silver linings for Republicans as well. Senate seats up for re-election in blue states were not won by Obama by margins that were as wide as the red states won by Romney, where Democrats were up for re-election in 2014. If Democrats hold on to the White House, they need a net gain of 4 seats to retake the Senate. If they lose the White House, they'll need 5 seats. What chance do you think the Republicans have of keeping control of the Senate, Mr. Unger?
Well, look, Charlie Cook's terrific, but I wrote this article 2 years ago. This has always been obvious ever since the last election. We know who's up this time. We know what seats should be safe. We know what Republican seats are going to be tougher. Look, when you only have to win 4 seats, as you say, or hold 4 if the Democrats keep it, because you have the vice president to break ties, or 5, you have a very, very good chance, as this thing is made up, going into the next election. If I had to bet money today, particularly when you have surprises like Marco Rubio not running for his seat again in Florida, this creates a real turn right there. I would, sitting here today, bet that the Senate probably will go back to the Democrats, not the House, obviously. But.
We've seen that there's in recent presidential cycles, there's a constant uptick in the correlation between the Senate and the presidential race, or how the state votes for the presidential race. So I think certainly, as we've seen in the past, a lot depends on that. We saw that in 2012. And so it is kind of early, but from what we're looking at, a lot of people tend to vote according to the party line, how they're voting for the president.
I think that's a good point, and I think that for the Republicans it was a really missed opportunity. This moment of power where they could have really redefined the Republican Party and said, we're the party of all the people, and we really welcome diversity, and we're not just representing, for the most part, middle class and upper class white men. And I think they missed that opportunity by opposing President Obama on just about everything. They really define themselves by their opposition to President Obama as opposed to really creating their own agenda.
Also remember that Republicans tend to do well in low turnout elections. Midterms are low turnout elections.
2010, 2014.
Right, exactly. Democrats, conversely, tend to do much better in high turnouts, and high turnouts come in presidential years. So, I mean, the deck is clearly stacked, barring some things happening between now and the election, or a seriously failed effort of a Democratic presidential candidate. The deck is definitely stacked for it to return.
How much do you think it plays a role, Rick, when if Republicans were to keep the Senate and take the White House, suddenly they control all three branches? Do you think that scares people to a certain extent, or do they say, oh good, gridlock's finally over?
It's a great question. It really is, because Americans have a basic love of splitting the baby. They always have. They like, if the White House is in the hands of one party, they want Congress to be in the hands of the other. I don't know why it is, but it is. So yeah, I mean, but they tend not to do it consciously during a presidential election year, because presidential elections have coattails. So if you have a Republican that's looking good and is going to win in 2016 the White House, odds are they're going to make it better for the other Republican candidates, and they'll get that 2 years of having both houses. They'll probably lose it, though, the 2 years after that.
Jane, you mentioned before that Republicans opposed President Obama basically on everything. Were you surprised by what you saw yesterday when Senate Democrats actually opposed the president on trade while Republicans were trying to support him? I mean, it hasn't been completely the usual narrative, at least yesterday.
I wasn't surprised, because I think that Obama's biggest flaw is that he's just so interested in keeping his foot on the pedal of the economy that he's lost his values. And his values should really be speaking for the common person and speaking for the environment and speaking for what's really good for Americans, not just corporate America.
Why are you assuming it's bad for the common person?
Well, I think it's going to be a corporate coup d'etat, is how it was described in the New York Times, and I agree 100%.
Why?
Because it's really about accelerating globalization, and forget about mom and pop capitalism. Forget about all the people who are concerned about growing locally and eating locally and keeping GMOs out of the food supply and getting rid of big agriculture and industrial meat production and all the other things that are destroying our environment and really hurting our world. And it's all about just, let's have more trade. You know, good trade is good trade. Bad trade is bad trade.
Words to live by, I suppose. Look, I mean, I haven't read this thing yet, and this is why I've been very, very cautious.
Apparently nobody has.
Nobody has. I mean, some people inside Congress have been allowed to take a look at it. But that's it. It's classified. And until I do read it, I'm not going to form a strong opinion. But I will say this, the arguments on both sides that everybody should be aware of. Obama is right. The president is right when he makes the statement 95% of our customers are outside of the United States. Why would we want to let them set the rules that we have to live by? So that's a fair point to be considered. On the other side, which is some of the issues that you're raising, Jane, and the other question is the impact it might have on domestic employment. Look, we have a thing, and the reason the Democrats are so concerned is we look at NAFTA. And there's a lot of concern that NAFTA was the key driver for all of these jobs that left the United States. Mm-hmm. No one's ever been able to prove it's true, so that means one of three things. One is it is true, and NAFTA was the reason that this happened. It's partially true, or it's not true at all, and technology was really more responsible, and pricing issues. So the Democrats have formed an entire point of view based on the belief that NAFTA was the bad guy. May have been, but we don't really know. These are the two sides of this argument. Till we read it, I don't know how anybody has a strong
funny
opinion.
how history repeats itself. Because NAFTA was legislation that was pushed by a Democratic president,
right.
Bill Clinton, and passed by a Republican Congress.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
They agreed on that then, and
Exactly
here we
right.
are all these years later, and everybody is still in the
Here we
same
are again.
exact boat. Lisa, last word.
And going back to the whole issue of the Senate, what's going to happen in 2016, a lot of these toss-up states, with the exception of Illinois, are not slam dunk Republican states.
Right.
Maybe Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, but
You mean
really
Democratic states?
Democratic. You're right. Yeah. So a lot is still unknown. It's not an absolute.
A lot of the candidates are.
Exactly.
We don't know
Exactly.
Yeah, Pat Toomey won in Pennsylvania, right? So there are exceptions in Senate races and congressional races. It's not necessarily things stay blue, like New Jersey,
Right.
With Chris Christie or Mitt
Jersey's-
Romney in
yeah.
Massachusetts. I know those as our governors, but blue
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean blue on a more
exactly.
local level. Anyway, it'll be interesting, but we have 2 whole years to talk about, just like presidential elections. Meanwhile, President Obama has labeled a group of Americans society's lottery winners and reveals that Fox News makes him very angry. Who is the commander-in-chief talking about, and what has him so upset? Stay right here. We'll be right back. Back to the show. President Obama taking aim once again at Republicans and conservative media. At a Georgetown University panel discussion on poverty, the president said the poor are often stereotyped.
Over the last 40 years, sadly, I think there's been an effort to either make folks mad at folks at the top or to be mad at folks at the bottom. And I think the effort to suggest that the poor are sponges, leeches, don't want to work, are lazy, are undeserving, got traction.
And who does the president blame for this? Well, you guessed it.
It's still being propagated. I mean, I have to say that, if you watch Fox News on a regular basis, it is a constant menu. They will find, like, folks who make me mad. I don't know where they find them, right? They're all like, I don't want to work. I just want a free Obama phone or whatever. And that becomes an entire narrative, right, that gets worked up.
Now, the president argues there's rarely an interview with a hardworking waitress with children who still can't pay the bills. Mr. Obama says the stereotypes are a barrier to finding solutions that will be acceptable to Republican leaders in the House and Senate. Arthur Brooks, he's of the American Enterprise Institute, warned the president about questioning the motives of Republican leaders, calling it, quote, #1 barrier to making progress. Rick, can the president really single out Fox News as a reason for this narrative being so off course?
Well, he didn't, and that's, I have to say, I'm a little bit disturbed by the video we just showed, because we should have gone back at least 45 seconds earlier to set it up correctly. The president didn't blame Fox News. What he said was, we get a false point of view of who the poor are.
From Fox News.
Well, but here's what he's saying. He's not blaming them for being poor. He's saying that when you show videos, and the example he used of you only see poor people on Fox when they are talking about how they want to get their Obama phones, then you're not.
He said that they were referred.
Let me finish. You're not seeing poor people on there who go to work every day at Walmart's or wherever and work a hard 40-hour week and come home and still need food stamps because they're poor. And that was the point he was making. He was not blaming Fox for poor people. He did actually use some language I think he shouldn't have used, which we didn't show. There's a big difference there. He was highlighting the fact that Americans need to understand, and he's right, who the poor people in this country are, because we have an image of them as lazy, no good for nothings who just want to be on welfare, and there are some of those. And that's what we tend to see on TV. But we also have people who work 40-hour work weeks, support families, and don't make enough to meet the poverty line. They are also poor people, and that was his point.
But he also said that Fox News portrays them as sponges, as leeches.
That's what I said. He used some language that I wouldn't have used.
Right.
So, but again, understand his point. When all you're willing to do is show people who want to get free telephones and use that to show people what the poor are in this country, is that a fair representation?
But you've been on that network. I've been on that network.
both have.
You think
That's
that's
right.
the only thing that they show? Because I see plenty of poor veterans that come back from wars that have trouble getting jobs. They do job
That's
fairs
actually
for.
fair. I have seen that too. But I have not seen situations where they're doing stories on that hard-working woman.
But no one does stories on that.
I agree with you.
I
agree with you. I completely agree with that. So I'm not picking on Fox, and I agree with you that the language was not necessary.
No.
What I would have
But
done,
I got his point.
if
And
I
it
were
was right.
President Obama trying to make the point, I would say, there are abuses in the welfare system. Welfare for the poor and welfare for the rich.
Right.
Because I think to try to make the argument that, there are no abuses in the welfare system, you're just not going to win with that one.
But
There's a lot of
but
people
that's
who
not
are
really what he
very
was talking
angry.
about there.
No, but that's really the point, that people are angry that some people are ripping off the system and they're getting things that they're not entitled to. And so that does need to be addressed. But it's happening with the poor. It's also happening with the rich. We're seeing government subsidies of big agriculture, which is basically welfare for wealthy farmers. We're seeing the big bankers who caused the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression not only not go to jail, but the bailouts.
But let's
You're
stay
right.
on
You're
point,
right
though.
about all
I
that, but
agree.
let's stay on point. The point he was making is Americans need to understand who the American poor are. You're talking about the unfairness in the system in all ways. And the poor in this country are not just the people trying to get free telephones. They are people who work hard, support their families.
It was an implicit attack on welfare recipients. Let's call what he was responding to what it is.
He was saying that a major cable network was pushing a narrative
Yeah,
around the poor. Right.
Right.
But what he did not bring up was the fact that under his 6 years that there are 14 more million people on food
gonna say
stamps,
that.
that welfare rolls have grown. So
Actually,
he's actually blaming the messenger, or he perceives as the message from the messenger, instead of his own record,
I don't
which
think
has
that was
been
the point
deplorable.
either. Actually, I got to tell
But
you
he
first.
doesn't address that.
It's a different subject, but we can address it now.
But he should be. Go ahead.
First of all, you should know that for the first time since 2011, the numbers have come down on food stamps. We just saw the numbers this week, and they've come down. That's a good thing.
Overall, over 6
Oh,
years.
right.
No, I'm
Overall,
talking about since 2011. But I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying that at least it indicates the economy is doing some turning because we're seeing more people come off. Secondly, you never have heard me blame President Bush for what happened in the economy because I don't think it's his fault. But you cannot blame President Obama for the fact that
Well,
he showed.
I do think it's his fault because we had taken
Well,
all that money we spent on the Iraq
okay.
War and
All
used
right.
it for education and used it to improve our
My
infrastructure.
point
We'd be in a
is-
lot better spot right now.
My point is that you cannot blame any president for the fact that things got so bad in this country that people needed.
But this is during a time of
I think it's
recovery that
beneath,
it's gotten.
though,
That it's
Doesn't
From a
gotten
matter.
media
They're not back to
perspective,
work.
it's beneath the office to continually bring up a cable news network as much
He
as
does
he
do it
does.
too much. I agree
George
with
W.
that.
Bush
I
got
agree.
killed by MSNBC. You don't see him bring it up.
Exactly.
That
Right?
I agree with.
Yeah, just don't bring it up. You could say
That
the
I
media
agree.
narrative, but
Right.
specifically focusing on them.
There-
He
that's
could do
where I
better.
agree.
He could do better. Anyway, we have much more to talk about. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to The Wrap. Israel now saying it's disappointed by the Vatican's decision to recognize Palestinian statehood. A new treaty finalized today concerns the activities of the Catholic Church in Palestinian territory. While only a symbolic move, it also makes explicit that the Holy See is switching its diplomatic recognition from the Palestine Liberation Organization to the State of Palestine. In a statement, Israel's foreign ministry says, and we quote, "This move does not promote the peace process and distances the Palestinian leadership from returning to direct and bilateral negotiations. Israel will study the agreement and will consider its steps accordingly." The U.S. and Israel oppose recognition, arguing that it undermines U.S.-led efforts to negotiate an Israeli-Palestinian deal on the terms of Palestinian statehood. The American Jewish Committee calls the Vatican's recognition counterproductive, and the Anti-Defamation League says it was, quote, premature. Most of Western Europe has held off on recognition, but some countries have hinted that their position could change if peace efforts remain deadlocked. A 2012 UN vote recognized Palestine as a non-member observer state made up of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, all land Israel captured in the 1967 Mideast War. This isn't the first time that the Vatican, under Pope Francis, has taken diplomatic moves knowing it would please some quarters and ruffle some feathers elsewhere. Just last month, the Pope referred to the slaughter of Armenians by Turkish Ottomans a century ago as, quote, genocide, prompting Turkey to recall its ambassador. What do you think of the Vatican, or what do you think they're trying to accomplish anyway by this move, Ms. Jendovitz?
Well, whether he's trying to accomplish renewed negotiations between Israel and Palestine, this is not something that is new for the Vatican, although it is a formal treaty. The Vatican has recognized Palestine as a state since the 2012 United Nations decision. It's interesting that the head of the reform movement, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, also agrees with the two-state solution, and he praises the Pope's moral leadership, but says it should not have been a unilateral decision. This
Are you saying the Pope?
This Pope,
Are
though,
you saying? Let me jump in here for a second. Are you saying the Pope issued an executive action on this?
That the Pope makes
exist?
He doesn't have a Congress.
Right, he doesn't have a con. Well, he has the bishops, right?
He does,
can
but he's the
overrule
head.
them like
He
that.
overrules everything.
Okay, or the
He's-
Cardinals. Boy,
Yeah.
I only go to
He's-
more often.
You made the point of him recently coming out about the Armenians and the genocide. This Pope, and it's one of the reasons a lot of people love him, he does not care as to how things appear or to sound or to appease people. He does what he really
Not a politician.
morally believes is the right thing. And so for that, I have to, agree with him in that. In this case.
I think this is a fabulous Pope, and he's very gay-friendly, for example. That certainly has probably ruffled feathers. He does what he feels is right. He's not political, and I think he's great. And as far as the decision he made, certainly, the greatest diplomatic minds of our time have been unable to solve this persistent problem. And so let's give him a try. And the other thing I want to say, I was just in Israel, and I went with a Jewish guide into the Arab quarter, and we all had lunch at an Arab restaurant, and everybody was laughing and hugging each other, and it was so touching to me. And I thought, wow, here we are in Jerusalem in an Arab quarter and a Jewish guide and everybody, the Arab store owner, and having fun and sharing food. There is a possibility for peace. I felt it as I sat there with these people. It's the politicians who have made it impossible. The people are capable of peace.
What did you order, by the way? What do you get at an Arab restaurant?
Being a vegan, I had some falafel.
You had the okay, very good. You saw that Seinfeld episode where the guy tries to open up the Pakistani restaurant,
Yes,
and
yes.
it fails in
Didn't
like
work
2
out so
days.
well.
But that's New York, and
This,
it's different over there. Anyway, I'm going off on a
That's
tangent.
this is not a big deal. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that if you look at the wording that was used, disappointed, stuff, it was very soft. The Vatican already had an arrangement and a relationship and an agreement with the Palestinian Liberation. This means nothing. It's that simple. Look, I mean, Western Europe has been staying in line with the U.S. and Israel because we keep pretending that we can use this as the main baseball bat, if you will,
Driver.
to force an agreement. It's not happening. He just did this because, and we knew he was going to do it. Not a big issue. It's just not.
You didn't call him what you normally call him, by the
Whoa,
way.
Pope Frankie?
Pope Frankie,
I'm sorry,
yes.
Pope Frankie.
Right.
Sorry.
Usually some
You're
love.
in really
Pope,
close
Pope
terms.
Frankie is the man. I do love him. This is not going to do either him, the Vatican, Catholics, or the peace process, such as it is, any harm whatsoever.
Decent PR move, though, for
Good
for
PR
a
move
guy who
for
gets
Frankie.
more press than any pope that I can
Well
remember
deserved.
ever in my
Yes.
Well
lifetime.
Yes.
deserved. Well deserved.
Absolutely. Lisa, final word.
Absolutely, and again, this is not a surprise, and I agree with Rick. The responses, even the negative responses that we're hearing, are not on the high level of disappointed. I don't think overall this is going to make a big factor on either side.
Right.
For
But
anyone.
we are talking about it, so that means something on some
It does,
level.
but I think
Right.
it's going to go by rather quickly.
Pope Frankie for president.
Pope
That's
Frankie
my
for
last
president.
word on it.
There you go. Speaking of presidents and possible ones, Hillary Clinton under fire again, and not just over the number of questions she failed to answer. We'll tell you about what next. Stay right there. And welcome back to the Daily Wrap. Well, earlier this week, we told you about former Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina having answered more than 300 questions than her 2016 rival, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Well, now you can keep track of Mrs. Clinton's progress, or lack thereof, with a new clock that is keeping track of exactly how many minutes it's been since she has answered a question from the press. According to the clock, there it is, 31,952 minutes and 20 seconds. Boy, we are right up to date with that. Since she took her last question on April 21st at about 3 p.m. But the makers of the clock, that's the Washington Post, well, they're not the only ones making fun of the presidential hopeful. Kentucky Senator and fellow 2016 hopeful Rand Paul is also taking a jab at Mrs. Clinton by tweeting a revised version of her to-do list. As you can see, Mrs. Clinton's list includes items like sign off on contracts, hire teams, finalize operations budget, get final update of funding donor list. Mr. Paul's list, however, includes things like sign off on new private server location, hire next stage of reporters to avoid real questions, finalize plan to invade Benghazi testimony, and Get final update of foreign contributors list. Rand Paul, who knew he had it in him? Well, speaking of foreign contributors list, another piece of Mrs. Clinton's past is coming back to haunt her. While traveling as Secretary of State, Mrs. Clinton visited a number of Boeing facilities around the world, often making a pitch for the host country to buy Boeing jets to help boost the economy. One deal from 2010 with Russian airline Rossiya is currently being questioned because of a peculiar change of events. The deal that brought in $3.7 billion for Boeing also brought the Clinton Foundation $900,000. Boeing is now part of a growing list of questionable Clinton Foundation donors. Defenders say there is nothing shady going on here, nothing to see here, but the Clinton-Boeing relationship goes deeper than just one deal. Boeing paid former President Bill Clinton $250,000 back in 2012 for a speech approved by the State Department's Ethics Office. What do you make of these new Boeing discoveries, Lisa Jandovitz?
This is just one more thing. I mean, we know that there's many deals that have put money in the pockets of the Clintons that have benefited businesses. Now, in this case, it's Boeing, that have benefited individuals. And the thing is that I don't know how she can get out of this. Either she is straightforward and tells and speaks the truth, and that would kill it. Or she says nothing, which is also equally as bad. So, but Rick says he knows how she can get out of it.
Rick, you have a very omnipotent, smug smile on your face.
I think we can all agree I have not been shy about dissing Hillary where she's had it coming. But what this story proves is what always happens. It just amazes me. You get a Clinton on the ropes, and you always push it that one too far and ruin everything.
Why was that too far?
Let me tell you why. Because the Secretary of State of the United States has one primary job: go overseas and push American industry.
Really?
Yes.
I thought it was negotiate.
It's all part of it.
But when they're benefiting financially?
Wait, my turn. Excuse me. My turn. Let me finish. Then you can jump on it. So she does her job. We only have one major commercial airliner manufacturer in this country. It's called Boeing. Now, if Hillary Clinton was over there pushing Airbus, I'd have some suspicions about that, since they're a foreign manufacturer. The contribution that Boeing made to the Clinton Foundation, it is nefarious. It was a direct contribution to the Haiti Fund.
Exactly.
So once again, we see you can get all, but the reality is you had some great stuff on Hillary, and once again you've gone too far and screwed it up, and everybody's going to know it, and you've blown it.
So that is a passionate defense by
It's
Mr.
true.
Unger, who is a Democrat, who
Have I not been going after Hillary?
No. You let me finish my point, okay? The point is, you are articulate, you are lucid, and people can agree or disagree with you. The point is, why are you making the argument and we don't hear from Bill or Hillary Clinton?
Because
on
anytime they would speak, especially Hillary, it would only fan the flames.
That's right.
I think she's being very smart. She's laying low. And I have to say about Rand Paul's little joke that he better be careful, because A, it's not presidential, and B, a lot of women identify with Hillary Clinton, and that's the thing that I think the Republicans are forgetting. And they know what it's like to be harassed and bullied.
What does being a woman have to do anything with those streets?
I think that there has to be a certain amount of respect in the way you treat Hillary Clinton, because she is a woman of a certain age. And I think that what Rand Paul did was smart-assed, for lack of a better phrase.
I actually didn't mind that. I thought it was funny.
It actually was a little funny.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Let me go back to Jake. I agree with you on one point.
Okay.
It is smart for her not to speak, because when she does, her poll numbers go down.
And it's not good for the, the
Right.
clock. You know?
It's not good for the clock.
Right.
Now, all that said, a new poll comes out today. A Fox News poll shows Jeb Bush beating her by a point. Shows Marco Rubio within 3. I think she's going to start talking soon. That's what gets her attention.
She's absolutely smart on this one to shut up and let people like me say it, because it becomes much more credible. And this was a mistake.
The next Jay
The other
Carney,
guys.
Rick Unger for the Clinton presidency, perhaps. Anyway, he'll be sharing his favorite potluck of the day. That's next. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to The Wrap. It's potluck time. It's part of the show. We go around the table and share our favorite stories of the day, or in today's case, story of the day. We're going to go on a little bit of a different track tonight. And Rick will be the head chef tonight, and only chef for that matter.
Ooh.
What do you got?
That could be ugly. This horrible, horrible situation with this train that unfortunately met with a disaster last night in Philadelphia did leave 7 people dead. Hundreds of people were injured. Thank goodness it appears that only a few of those are critically injured, and hopefully they'll be okay. It's, while we certainly don't want to really think about anything that would politicize this terrible event, you can't help but wonder, as we all follow the news and learn more and more about what might have gone wrong here, did it have to be? Did it have to be? And what we're learning is there was a speed issue here, but what we also learn is that to Congress's benefit, thank goodness they did this, they required that all of these trains have to put a system on which, if it's working properly, would have slowed this train down to the speed limit it was supposed to go automatically. The problem is not all of the tracks. It takes a machine put on the train plus something done to the tracks for it to work properly. We now learn that because of the high cost, not all the tracks in the country have been outfitted with this, and wouldn't you know that this one area was not outfitted with it, and that's why this happened. This brings us to a discussion that I often feel I'm beating a dead horse, but I can't stop because it's so important, and that's the question of American infrastructure. There's a great article that I recommend. It was written by Uwe Reinhardt, who some of you may know from the healthcare world. He wrote in the New York Times a couple years ago talking about how a friend of his from Germany brought his son to the United States because he wanted his son to see what transportation and infrastructure was like in Germany back in the 1960s. And the only place to see it was in the United States. This is a serious problem. This is. We will spend $1.1 billion on Amtrak this year. That's what the Congress is going to allot. That's down, by the way, $250 million from previous years. The comparison, though, is what will get you. China will spend $250 billion this year on rail travel. Think about that. Think about what this means in the long term to our country if we fall so far behind in infrastructure that what must follow follows, and that means our economy falls with it. There's no way around it, I'm afraid. This is one of those things we don't have to argue about. If we don't maintain an intelligent, modern-day infrastructure, our economy cannot stay a first-class economy. It just has never happened and never will happen. How do you do that? It's easy for us to sit here and go, but we don't have any money. And it's true. We have serious money problems. But the one thing that's so counterintuitive, sometimes you have to, all times you have to invest money to make money. I'll bet you everybody watching will agree with that statement. You have to invest money to make money. And yes, we make a terrible mistake when we spend money badly and we waste it and we throw it away. And we throw it away on programs that you don't believe we should be spending on. We should be taking that money to put in infrastructure. But you know what? This country needs over $1 trillion of infrastructure investment, and we don't bring in enough money even if we threw out welfare to pay for that. So there's only one way you can do it. You actually have to borrow. Now that is, oh my God, borrow? How can we borrow any more money? Because if you can borrow at 2%, which is what our government can do, and you can prove that increasing the infrastructure, improving it to a modern day infrastructure like many parts of the world, that will make back more than 2%, and I don't think you'll find an economist anywhere who would disagree that that's what would happen, then it makes sense to do it. So if people could start training their mind on that fundamental business principle, and I'm not saying just start willy-nilly borrowing money to waste it, and if you want to talk about stopping to borrow for other things, it's a discussion we should always be having as Americans. But folks, if you don't get your head around this, none of those other issues are going to matter, because we will become a third world country, and nobody can argue otherwise.
Well, I agree with you 100%, except for the borrowing part, because there is so much pork and so much just
Take it all out.
wasted,
You won't have
jaded
enough.
spending,
Take it all out.
ridiculous programs in the National Institutes of Health. I was just in
Let's
Florida.
not, wait, but don't do a rant on waste. Let's talk about infrastructure. You're right.
No, but wait a second.
Let me just say this. Take every bit of waste out of the budget, every cent of it, and put it towards infrastructure. You will not have $1 trillion or more to do.
Well, I read the 2010 master plan for the Northeast Corridor for Amtrak, or at least parts of it, and they said $50 billion, and they had plans that
That's
looked
just
like
Amtrak. I'm
fantastic.
talking about all American infrastructure.
Yes, but the accident happened on the Amtrak Northeast Corridor, which is the most crucial corridor for our rail infrastructure in America.
It's also,
between New York City and Washington, D.C.
It's also the most profitable within Amtrak. The problem with Amtrak is that all their other lines lose money.
Yes.
So if you invest in Amtrak, you'd have to have some parameters around that. Look, Northeast Corridor is very important. Boston, Washington, Philly, and New York. I've taken it 1,000 times. Right. But the other lines that aren't making money, we got to figure out something.
To Amtrak, that's one piece of infrastructure.
Right. Okay. Well, good potluck there, Ricky. And when we come back, it's yay or nay. This is the Daily Wrap. It's happy time, people. Welcome back to the Daily Wrap. It's time for yay or nay. First up, North Korea's defense chief was publicly executed by anti-aircraft gunfire last month for disloyalty. What exactly did the defense chief do? Jane's laughing, the guy's dead. To deserve such a public and brutal death? He fell asleep during a military event and disagreed with Kim Jong-un. And that's your ball game. You should see what happens when we disagree with Rick around here. If you were offered $1 billion as your yay or nay question to be the defense chief of North Korea, would you take it, Jane?
Well, yes, but I would have Seth Rogen and James Franco as my chief lieutenants to protect me.
That's true. They killed Kim Jong-un at the end of the movie that no one saw. And Lisa?
No, I wouldn't want anything to do with any job in North Korea.
That's smart. Well
You
played.
just ruined that movie for me. Now I know how it ends.
Oh, yeah.
No, I
say.
say.
Blow up his head.
Can you spend $1 billion in North Korea?
I believe it is.
Is there something to buy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Plenty.
Uniforms.
No.
Uniforms. I don't think I would do it.
Uniforms. Security, perhaps.
Right.
Anyway, HBO's Game of Thrones is huge right now. I watch it. Fans love the drama and the gore and the fantasy of it all. The key word there being fantasy. Apparently, the show's biggest fan, rapper Snoop Dogg, didn't get the memo on the last part. The rapper, who even provided a track for one of the show's soundtracks, didn't hear that one, opened up during an interview he did recently with the New York Post saying, quote, "I watched Game of Thrones for historic reasons, to try to understand what this world was based on before I got here. I'd like to know how we got here from there to here and the similarities between then and now." Oh boy. For the record, for those of you who don't watch, Game of Thrones is based on pure fantasy from the genius mind of author and creator George R.R. Martin. Are Mr. Dogg's extracurricular activities having an effect on his historical perspective?
Poor dog. I mean, you just see him sitting there deciding he's going to look deep, man. He's going deep. He's going to show you, I'm more than just this TV show. Only to find out he's a complete moron. Poor dog.
Wow.
Poor Snoop.
Lisa?
I feel you, Snoop.
It's Snoop Dogg. It's like there's nothing further to say. No.
Don't disrespect
Snoop Dogg
Snoop.
is cool.
He
He's
used to
cool,
be.
but to
There's
come
a
out with
certain
that.
intelligence behind cool, and it's a different kind of intelligence than knowing about history. But I'd like to be as cool as Snoop Dogg, that's for sure.
It's okay not to know the history, but
Right,
when you
to know that
say
it's
that
fantasy,
you think it is history,
Right, exactly.
Right.
problematic.
Do you watch the show?
No.
You have to understand, there are dragons going around executing people.
But he,
I'm sorry, I'm into Downton Abbey and House of Cards.
Okay, well,
Now
Downton
that's
Abbey is
business.
done.
Well, Downton.
I know it,
One
I'm
more year.
devastated.
One more year?
One more
year.
Oh,
You know you're
thank
pretentious when you call it Downton instead of downtown,
right.
like those, people who don't watch the show do. Like me.
Lady Mary must come
Mitt
back to my
Romney
life.
back in the news. Take a look and a sound at this.
Hi, I'm Mitt Romney, and you may recognize me from television or the news or just around town. You've heard my critics say that I'm out of touch, that I'm stiff, that I just don't relate to people. For years, I've been listening to garbage like that, and I've decided to fight back. How do you do that? By taking on the former heavyweight champion of the world.
Well, it's hard to believe, that he's actually 60, what, 8?
He's 68, I
Yeah,
think.
68
He's in
years old.
amazing
Damn,
shape.
He looks good. But anyway, you heard it from the man himself. Romney training in preparation to take on former champ Evander Holyfield this Friday in a charity match for Charity Vision. The match is projected to raise $1 million for the Utah-based nonprofit Tickets for the fight are running up to $150,000, with 100% of the proceeds, not 10 like the Clinton Foundation, going to Charity Vision. Would you spend $150,000 or even $150 to see a Romney-Holyfield fight?
Well, I mean, first I have to say, I'm going to name drop. I know Evander. This charity is a terrific charity, so absolutely spend that money, get behind it. And you know, Romney's a cool dude. I don't know why he didn't show more during the election.
Agreed. Lisa, quickly.
Right, he should have done this during the election. Good for him.
Yes, I'd like to see him in shorts, just out of curiosity.
Okay. Fascinating way to end this show. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. Great job, panel. I'm Joe Concha, reminding you it has now been 23 days since Hillary Clinton has answered a question from the press. Newsmax Prime with J.D. Hayworth is next. Don't go anywhere.